Hello and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And we are back on the Acolyte Appetite talking about episode number 7, Choice, directed by Kogonada and written by Charmaine DeGraté and Jen Richards. Sarah, we're back once again. And
we are indeed.
This is the penultimate episode of, I'm going to say season 1, because we're going to hashtag renew the Acolyte. It's going to happen. Right. We're manifesting. We're manifesting in this house.
Yeah,
right. Mm-hmm. Acolyte season 2 will happen, manifesting. But what an episode of TV. I think I can speak for both of us in saying that this was a distressing 40 minutes of TV.
Yes.
Probably one of the more tragic episodes of the Acolyte that we've gotten thus far. It was so weird kind of going from a 2 straight weeks of thirsting over Manny Jacinto and Kymir and Osha to then being like, ooh, institutions are bad. Ooh, people make mistakes. Ooh, assumptions are bad because they make an ass out of you and me.
I like the it's the oops. We forgot that this is a show where the Jedi definitely goofed, and we did promise that we were going to show you that. So here's that episode.
We got a little lost in the Mandy sauce. You know what I mean? It was.
But actually though, because episodes 4 and 5, I mean, I was literally like bouncing off the walls, pacing in my room, screaming, crying, throwing up, and screaming from the top of every mountaintop. And then episode 6, I was like glued into my seat, like, oh my God, the tension. Oh my God, super hot people. And then episode 7, I'm like, I'm depressed, actually. And no, I'm just depressed.
This is a complicated episode, I feel like. I don't know like where to quite start with this one. And again, full spoilers ahead. If you're always listening to us, you know that, but just laying it out there. Let's start with the emotions of this episode. We kind of knew this was going to be another flashback episode, piecing together with episode 3 directed by Kogonada. Like I said, this was a distressing episode. I think it was something that was tonally different from the rest of the series thus far. You know, we knew we were getting Rashomon, so it was going to be this like differing perspective of events. And I think we have some thoughts on that as well. But all the mistakes that people make and the choices that people make, you know, the episode being titled Choice, it was sort of like a slow motion train crash, you know?
Right.
And I finished the episode. I kind of sat on the couch for a while and I was just sitting, you know, going through Twitter. Everybody was kind of going through it. And, you know, our good boy Soul has had some history of bad choices made, you know? And I think that was a lot to grapple with coming out of this. How did you feel like walking away from this episode? Because you had a very strong reaction to this one.
This episode really bothered me on a first watch. Like obviously we knew that it was coming. I think it was different than we had expected because I think we both expected a May point of view. And it was really kind of the Jedi's point of view instead. And that was a bit surprising. But, you know, and we knew that people were going to make the wrong choices or bad choices that led to how everything turned out. But I was so sad, and a friend had messaged me and, you know, it said, hey, you know, like, I see your tweet. Can you give me a rundown? Like, do they let us in on like what happened? And I said, yeah, they let us in on what happened. And I'm just sad. I'm just sad about it. And it really emotionally threw me in a way, in much more strongly than like I was expecting, to the point where like I sat around for a while quite quietly and then went and got ice cream for dinner at 10 p.m. and then like sat in my car and ate my ice cream and then sat in my car till like midnight, like scrolling Twitter and just like doing nothing. I did not want to eat other food at that point, but I just was like, I'm so sad about this, and I feel the other episodes in the series have made me feel so dramatically. Like it's really taken us on quite a ride, because there was the initial thrill of the first few episodes as we got to see them at the premiere, and then again, you know, like at home, and then the episode 3 felt pretty devastating, but also like, wow, we're missing so much in this timeline. And then episodes 4 and 5, I mean, I was like buzzing. I'm like, oh, this is thrilling Star Wars. I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going crazy. And then episode 6, I was like, ah. And now I'm just like, and I'm depressed. And like, that, it's just been a really wild thing to think back on. And I said to you, I was like, I don't know if I want to talk about this episode. I typically go immediately right into a rewatch for notes, or, spend a day and then go into my rewatch for notes. And I was like, I don't even want to rewatch this episode. I was like, if I did not have a sort of obligation to talk about the episode, I think I'd just be quiet and wait until next week. And then I just kind of see how it all ends. But, we have an obligation and that we've signed ourselves up for to talk about it. So I was like, we'll get there. And then I had some funky health situations this week, which affected my face, which affects, talking, which is the gig here, which is the gig. So this is why this is late. So this is my fault and I apologize.
We could change the gig where we just sit here and quietly stare at each other for 45 minutes in silence and just release that. And it's a lot less editing for me. It's just a 45-minute breathing and maybe occasional coughing kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
We can consider.
Workshop it. Yeah.
Yeah. But basically I tweeted, what if I just sat in silence until next week? And a couple of people were like, barrage vow. And I was like, I mean, I see what you're saying, but I'm actually sad right now. But
Sarah says she's going to take a 7-day barrage vow, ends up being 10 years. And I find her on some other planet.
Right. But also, like, I really didn't intend to stay silent about it. Like, I recognized that I had an obligation to talk about it. So the fact that I felt like I literally couldn't talk about it because I was in pain for a few days, hilarious manifestation of the tweet. Really painful, upsetting. But yeah, this episode just kind of turned out differently than I expected it to. And in terms of how it was presented to us. And yeah, do we want to talk about that a little bit now?
Yeah, and I think too, like what you're getting at is the reaction that I think Leslye and team expected coming out of this, right? Like this isn't a black and white TV show. This is a show that makes you pause and think and deal in that moral ambiguity. And you had texted me afterwards, all good intentions or the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we should start our conversation at a very high level, just without getting it, too much into the weeds at the moment. We'll talk through the episode and some of those like pivotal moments where those good intentions do go wrong. But I feel like that's the best way to describe this episode, to describe Soul's journey as a character, to describe the choices that people make. And it's a very human thing, I think, right? Like, we make the wrong choice sometimes. That's the reason that I love The Last Jedi, because Luke made the wrong choice in a single moment, and it was a cataclysmically bad judgment call on his part. But he's human. He saw something in a vision. He was scared. He was fearful. He ignited his lightsaber, and just that split-second decision, that choice. To Mother Anasea's point, someday those noble intentions you all have will destroy every Jedi in the galaxy. And that idea of noble intention. So let's start there. There's this quote from Leslye Headland from a Nerdist article that we'll link in the bio. And it's, quote, "It's a show about the bad guys in every sense of that word. And because my previous work before coming into Star Wars was almost always concerned with some sort of morality, immorality, or amorality, it was always clear about characters running through a spectrum of those things, as opposed to having a good character and a bad character, a good girl and a bad girl, a nice guy and a womanizer. That these characters could be all of those things at once was so important to me. I'm glad that you got that impression from watching the episode, that the Jedi are not performing evil acts. They're not being willfully oppressive. They're not manipulating or tricking anyone. So if the show, with all the other characters, is exploring the spectrum of morality, the stranger being a great example, May being a great example, it felt to me that the Jedi also had to have that particular treatment." Soul is like probably the biggest perspective of this episode, the biggest point of view. And this episode is a story about him making some bad choices, right? And I think you could probably apply that to the grander Jedi Order. And there's been a lot of discussion about this. Is the Jedi Order inherently evil? No. Are the Jedi Order extremely have they strayed from the path? Yes. very much so, right? And you start to ask, why would Sol make these choices? It's because the institution in which he exists doesn't allow him the outlets to maybe work through those feelings, work through those emotions, to not, eventually not make that choice, right? To actually like have that emotional maturity and that kind of
cultural sensitivity.
Cultural sensitivity of like, hey, if you go to another planet and you see some witches, they're not occults just because you don't understand their culture, you know? Like,
I mean, they might be a cult, but also there's a great point that Indara makes, and she says ceremonial markings are customary in many cultures across the galaxy, and you know he's just assuming that everything is going wrong when you know we have many different ways of living that aren't, and none of these are necessarily wrong. Yes, there are some bad things happening out there, but that doesn't mean they're happening just because we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that they're happening in all ways of life that we don't fully understand or identify with ourselves with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it kind of goes back to that idea of the Jedi as gatekeepers of Force, and
yes,
not about good or bad. It's about power and who's allowed to use it, right? And so any use of the Force that is different from what the Jedi deem the correct way is off-putting. And I think that's what Sol sees in the beginning of this episode. He sees an off-putting manner to these people, but it's because he is on the outside looking in. He doesn't see Anastasia say, hey, you know, sweet treats for my girls. Here, go get some spice cream, right? He doesn't see those moments. He is purely in the wrong place at the wrong time, seeing events and perceiving them based on his limited information. And, you know, that kind of goes hand in hand with just probably his own insecurity. You know, and Dara pokes fun at him about how he doesn't have a Padawan. All those insecurities, the inability to talk about emotions in the Jedi Order, the inability to confront those emotions. There is no emotion, there's peace. Is there really peace? Peace is a lie, according to Chimere, right? So it's like the institution of the Jedi has strayed so far from the living Force that you can't see the here and now, right? You can't see what's in front of you.
And also, is the opposite of emotion peace? I find peace in my understanding my emotions, right? Like it's the compartmentalizing of that idea as opposed to the acceptance of that idea. But that being said, Sol is like super emotional. He's like super emotional throughout this whole episode. And Dara is not very emotional. She's pretty objective and understanding throughout, or at least through her own morality. But I also just don't think that the peace and emotion are opposites. I think there is a certain peace in feeling a whole swath of emotions, but you have to have an understanding of yourself in order to navigate all of that.
And how do you compartmentalize those emotions? The Jedi don't teach that. They don't teach the ram, jam, ram method of the cart of emotions where you can take some off and put some on. And, you know, every cart has all of the tools.
The part for the parts, for the whole, and each part for the role it plays, not for what you want it to be, not for what you expect it to be, for what it is, which is a paraphrase, but about as close as I can remember on any good day.
And it's interesting to bring up Ram here because in the aftermath of this episode, I think I saw a lot of sentiment that, you know, the Jedi are awful, they're terrible, the Jedi Order sucks, which, like, I don't think the Jedi, like, to Leslie's point, they're not performing evil acts. They're not like inherently evil. But again, it is like the institution has amassed too much power. The institution is not in tune with the living Force. They're gatekeeping the Force more and more as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is natural that you are going to breed bad actors like Sol who have poor judgment, who don't understand how to deal with emotion, who don't know, like to Ram's point, how to take one emotion off the cart and put another emotion on the cart. Sol doesn't see the whole for the whole in every part. He sees the whole picture. He doesn't see all the parts of the whole, right?
Right.
And he's missing all those pieces. He doesn't see the things he doesn't see in this episode. He is only there and presently for the witches around the hole, for the mother pushing against them and for Mother Kroll coming into the forest and like yanking the kids back to the fortress, right? Like that's all he sees.
He's got a mystery jigsaw puzzle, like a escape room jigsaw puzzle where the image is different than what's on the box. And it's like the image is different than what's on the box. And he's built the border and he's like, it's a lighthouse. It's going to be a lighthouse, but it's like not actually a lighthouse. You know what I'm saying? And he's so certain it's a lighthouse because he's built the outline and he can kind of see maybe the edges show a little bit of the waves in the sea. And maybe the edge also shows like a little bit of light up at the top in the center. He's like, it's a lighthouse, but it's not. So he's got the pieces in front of him. He just doesn't know how to assemble them and has made an assumption based off of the 20 pieces he's already put in or whatever.
Yeah.
Sarah, make it like a jigsaw puzzle.
Make it a puzzle. All of this to say, I don't think we should walk away from this episode saying the Jedi are evil. I think we should walk away from this episode saying the institution is no longer what it once was. It's not the institution of the Ram Jamaram era. It is not what they want to present on the surface is not truly what it is anymore, right? And Soul is a symptom of that.
But has it ever been? A question that lies at the center of this. I mean, it's not really a question, but just kind of an idea of institutions, right? Like Batman's great line in Dark Knight, you either die or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. What was it? Apple was started out of like a garage, or Microsoft was started out of a garage, and now they're one of the biggest companies in the world. You know, like in some
good
areas,
intentions to connect the world becomes a harmful monopoly.
Greedy, monopolistic capitalism. Right.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the idea of institutions as being a bit soulless, even though they're made
I see
up.
What you did there. I see.
I didn't even intend that. Just kidding. I did. I'm really good at jokes and puns and memes. No, but like as a bit soulless, despite the fact that they're made up of people. And I think that, you know, the Jedi have their mission, vision, and values, and they do their best because at the end of the day, the people who are a part of the institution believe in the institution's missions. But at the same time, if the institution is not giving you all the tools to do a good job, then there will be things that fall through the cracks or don't get addressed in the right way. And I think that's the symptom that we're seeing with Soul. He's not a bad actor, certainly within his intentions, but he sees himself as a savior of a sort. And because he literally says, who is protecting this child if not the Jedi?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then the cultural sensitivity of, you know, Indara saying the ceremonial markings are part of different cultures. It comes right after that. And I think it was Jordan Mason was like tweeting like this is ultimately like a colonialism story. And he's right. And I could see that throughout this episode super, super clearly. Because ultimately what Soul is lacking is the awareness and the cultural sensitivity to understand that his experience isn't every experience.
Mm-hmm.
Also because he comes from the dominant understanding of the Force. He views everything through that lens, and he doesn't have the sort of worldview to understand the other, in a sense, and makes wrong choices. He's like sympathetic and he wants to help, and like I think there's a certain authenticity to that for sure. You can see it throughout this episode, but he lacks a certain empathy to understand the ways in which they live or to understand them better.
And he also misconstrues destiny with his desire, right? Like he is not. We're led to believe that the Jedi interpret the will of the Force correctly, right? And so I think here in this episode, he thinks he is interpreting the will of the Force. This is his destiny. His destiny is to have Osha as his Padawan. He feels it. He feels a strong connection to her. But it's his choice, not destiny. And it's interesting when you look at the titles of episode 3 and 7, one is destiny, one is choice. In episode 3, he's presenting to Osha, if you have the courage to tell the truth, you can be a Jedi. There are children like you. This is your destiny if you want it to be. In this episode, he is essentially, we're seeing that he is making that choice for Osha. He is directly influencing her destiny because he is coaching her through the test on what to say. Tell the truth. Tell us what you actually see on the data pad, right? He makes the choice to save Osha, but not May. And there's been a lot of parallels that have been drawn to Qui-Gon and Anakin. And I think that's a huge parallel here, right? Because Qui-Gon in The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon bets the pod race to say, how about the boy? If we win the race, I get the boy. And then Watto says, well, how about red for the mom, blue for the boy? Let's roll this chance cube. What does Qui-Gon do? He uses the Force to make the chance cube be blue. There's Anakin. He has now decided Anakin's fate for Anakin. Anakin would have ultimately wanted to leave with them. Fate. And Shmi's fate, yeah. Anakin would have wanted to go. Shmi would have let him go to have a better life, but Qui-Gon still made that choice for him, regardless of the choice that was actually going to be made, right? And that's like Anastaea's final words. It's like, hey, soul, she was going to go with you, by the way. She made the choice. This could have been avoided if we had just listened to each other. If you had listened to me, that's all. She was going to go with you regardless. But now look at the trouble you've created, right? And so again, like Qui-Gon's noble intentions led to Qui-Gon's noble end, and eventually Anakin became Darth Vader, and the Empire rose. So what a messy topic to discuss. It's just like, the Jedi as an institution was created out of good intention, but the Jedi as an institution, again, amasses too much power, doesn't properly treat its Jedi correctly in some ways, and doesn't give them the outlets to be humans and the full range of the human experience. And this is what ends up happening. It's you have these Jedi who go rogue, who make bad choices, and as a result, there are bad consequences.
It's interesting to me because, destiny and choice become so much clearer as words here, because we are seeing Osha's perspective on the set of events in Destiny. And of course, it feels like a destiny when she's feeling like she's stuck here and there's no other children and she wants to get out and wants to see the world a little bit. And then bam, these saviors appear and they're giving her a way out. And they're giving her a way out that allows her to use the Force too, which is something that, she has been more or less training in. And they also give her an out away from her sister, who she is always in competition with, just by nature, right? However, when we see the Jedi's perspective on events, everything they do is a choice. They could have just left them alone. They could have just found the virgins and gone, right? Like, so everything that they do is a choice. And I think that goes into kind of my surprise with how the episodes were presented to us, because when I watched episode 3, and I think we talked about this in our conversation about episode 3, I really felt that we were missing so many pieces of the puzzle. And I was like, this is going to get explained to us later with a different point of view, because we're missing so much. There's so many gaps here. Is May really as evil or violent, or as we're led to believe? How did this all happen? And then I think we all expected, at least me and Brad on this show, to get May's point of view in episode 7 and see a different perspective of the events. Maybe she didn't start the fire. Maybe something happened that made it worse. Maybe she had a different set of intentions, etc., etc. But what we actually got was mostly the Jedi's perspective, the gaps within what the Jedi were doing, which we had talked about in our episode 6 conversation, but was genuinely something I had not considered prior to that. I really expected it to be, the story of May and the story of Osha, and how the Jedi's events were interpreted by each of them. But that is the key difference from what I expected to what we received. Leslye had been talking about this idea of Rashomon, and the Rashomon effect, in conversations and interviews and things. And I think Brad and I were talking about this a little bit off here, but let's rehash that conversation because it was really good.
Yeah.
We see the Last Jedi, the kind of Rashomon effect there with Ben's point of view, with Luke's point of view, and then kind of what actually happened. And those things were based in their memory, their recollection of it. We saw Ben's memory of events in which Luke is the aggressor. We see Luke's interpretation of events or recollection of events in which he goes in there and then he realizes he's made a wrong choice, but then he's kind of defending himself after the rocks come down, right? Like,
yeah, Ben's the aggressor in his point of view in that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we get the final perspective, which gives us something a little bit different. It does happen 3 times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so I expected something a bit similar here where we'd get Osha's perspective and what happened in her mind, and then May's perspective on what happened in her mind. And that would give us 2 truths of the Jedi, where the actual truth lies somewhere in the middle. What I was surprised to see was that we actually got an objective set of events both times, just from different camera angles, more or less. We got Osha's step-by-step path, and then we got the Jedi's step-by-step path. But the events as they happened, whether it be the Force push or like the training session, or May and Osha at the Bunta tree, or the fire, these
or
things
the pit,
all happened.
The witches standing over the pit, right?
Right.
Like
these things all happened as we saw them in episode 3. We just got more gaps filled in. And that was surprising to me.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's and I don't want to say this like super with like a super negative connotation. It was kind of like a half-baked Rashomon in a way, because I do like the idea of filling in those gaps, that perspective of Saul, like being in those places to see like, ooh, these kids look like they're in danger. Like he is perceiving that, right? But the actual substance and the objectivity of those events is the same. The same lines are being spoken, the same facial expressions and movement and acting. And I think if we were going like full Rashomon, I would have liked to have seen maybe slightly different dialogue or slightly different versions of the events than compared to episode 3. And going back to your point about, I think I would have liked to have seen this more steeped in Soul's memory and recollection of the events versus the actual objectivity of the events, just from different physical locations of seeing them, different angles and camera shots. And so I think it's kind of that instance of, I really liked what we did. I think we could have gone a little deeper and put a little bit more of a spin on it. Because in the end, the answer was obvious. The answer was exactly what we expected. The Jedi did something bad. And we kind of knew that was coming. Where I really wanted the substance was like, how do these characters remember these events? And I think the interest to me lies in how they do remember them. Like Soul remembers it much differently than Osha, and remembers it much differently than May. Although I think in one of the interviews with Leslye, she had offered, did May actually tell Osha, I'll kill you? Or is that how Osha is remembering it? And that's where I really wanted to lean in more, was like, oh, are these things that people said actually things that they said? Or is that just Soul making that up and how he remembers it? Like, did May actually say, hey, we have to sacrifice ourselves for ascension? Did she actually say that? Or did Soul hear the word sacrifice at some point in the sentence, and then that's how he remembers her saying it? And so that little bit of connectivity there was missing for me. But I still like all the ideas that were presented. I liked filling in the gaps. And ultimately, like, I enjoyed this episode quite a bit, despite the tragedy of it all. That's probably like my only critique.
I did not enjoy this episode. I had a bad time. No, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm happy to kind of be working through them now. But yeah, and I'm not sure if kind of the way I reacted to it was more based in my expectation of what I expected to happen, with it being based in memory as opposed to perspective, or if just because seeing it play out in that way was just really upsetting, and maybe both of these things are true. But yeah, I was just a little surprised, and maybe I shouldn't have been, to see it based more in perspective than the idea of memory. And now I'm not somebody who's like super, super well versed in Rashomon effect or the source material of Rashomon the film. That's definitely a gap in my film knowledge, but based on what I knew, based on how it's been talked about, I had expected something a little bit more muddy in terms
Mhm.
of what is the truth here, which is what I felt in episode 3, which is like, what is the truth of this?
Yeah,
Um,
episode 3 felt more fractured. This felt very straightforward to the point of like, oh, okay, yep, that happened. Episode 3 made me feel, did that happen the way that it was shown, actually?
yeah, which to me was surprising that it was so straightforward in its presentation like that. Um, Maybe that made it even sadder for me. I think I may have preferred to see May's point of view, in which she feels particularly betrayed and also sees the Jedi as they arrive as a little bit more sinister than they appear. Um, and she sees the death of Mother Anastasia and is angry about that. Like all of these pieces, I think it would have been really interesting to see May's point of view, because I also felt like at the end of episode 5, right? At the end of episode 5, when they're having that conversation, I felt like there was a missing piece there. We've never actually really been in May's mind throughout all of this. And that's something to me that I find really interesting, because it's like, what is the end goal with May? Is May a goner? Is she about to sacrifice herself? Is she about to become a big bad to Osha's big bad? Osha and, Chimere's big bad? Become an oppositional force to them that is oppositional to the Sith-ish dark side that they're practicing, but also oppositional to the Jedi. Like what's May gotta do here? Like, what is her space? What is her functionality within the space as a character?
Mhm.
Um, and it's especially since the marketing only pushed her and not Osha. Hmm, I have questions.
And I have a pretty clear direction of where Osha's going. Uh,
Right.
Especially just what we see between episode 3 and 7. Again, to your point, Osha sees it as her destiny, but Soul knows it was his choice. There's a really good quote from Leslye comparing the two of them. She talks about, this is in the Collider article from our friend Maggie Lovett, and Leslye had said, it's the difference between a mother who says, I believe that you have your own agency and you can make your own choices even though you are young, even though you have not been ready for it. I believe in that. And a father who says, you don't know those things and the world is a particularly threatening place. It is my job to protect you from those things because you're not old enough to have the agency to do it. And so thinking of Osha's path, episode 7, again, we've seen now these two different perspectives of Brendock. What is Osha going to do when she learns that she never had any agency to begin with? It was not her destiny.
Right.
She was promised something that she was never actually going to, she was promised something that could never actually be fulfilled. Soul gave her that lightsaber and said, is this what you want? And now here Chimera is saying, hey, by the way, they lied to you. They promised you something. It was never going to happen. And for her to, I think some people have speculated maybe when she puts on the mask, she's gonna sense what Soul is telling May on the ship somewhere else, and that's how she kind of finds out, which I think would be really, really interesting. Maybe Soul admitting, I chose Osha, not you. I saved Osha, but I didn't intentionally save you in that moment, and I'm sorry. But for Osha, that revelation might send her over a cliff, you know? And so I think there are just so many ramifications for what could happen, and Chimera being there to kind of be that foil to Soul to say, you can trust me, you can't trust Soul. So what are you gonna do now? And that I'm scared for Osha's. I think she chooses the dark side. I don't see any other way around it. I think she chooses a different path. Her choice now. This is her choice. I'm gonna embrace my emotion.
Right. I think the clear path for her is where she realizes that not only is what she thinks about May a falsehood, but also what she thinks about the Jedi and Soul, who is her father figure, a falsehood. And that means that her entire life since age 8 has been alive. She's 24 now. And what is she going to do? She's going to use her agency for the first time in her life, truly.
Oof. Yeah.
And that is going to be with Chimere, because he's ultimately offering her agency through force, venues of the force that she has not previously explored. And I think he is saying, here's the door. You should open it. And he's saying behind the door, there's a path that has a lot of interesting things in it. And I think we should walk that path. And I think she is going to open the door and take the step because she's never gotten to actually open the door before. The door was open for her in the past, and the path was already decided in a certain way. So, and I think I also think that's true from her birth. Clearly born for a sort of specific purpose, if you will, to continue the lineage of, well, I don't want to say that for certain, in the sense that like maybe Mother Coral and Mother Anastasia really just wanted a kid and they just, wanted to be moms. And like, I respect that. But also there were no other kids in this coven, and otherwise this coven would die out. So them becoming leaders in the future is kind of an important piece to their story continuing. But yeah.
What a mess. Leslye drew a lot of lines to Empire Strikes Back, and that this episode is sort of that father figure, emotional betrayal, emotional violence, she described it as, right? And Soul kind of sliding into that role of like this emotionally violent character that does something bad, right? And again, like Osha is going to learn that truth. We're learning that truth with Osha kind of in this moment as we watch this episode. And I think you're right. I think she's going to finally have agency for the first time in her life. And what does she do with that? To Anastasia's point, if you want to reach out and pull the thread, then pull it. Right. Episode 8 is going to be Osha pulling that thread.
Yeah.
We need a season 2 is what I'm saying, because how do we wrap up everything in one episode?
Right.
I need more.
Especially considering these episodes have been like 30-ish minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, honestly, taking a step back from conversation about the episode, how have we not gotten a season 2 announcement? How are we sitting in limbo right now as fans?
Yeah. If I don't get an end credit white text, black background moment that says the Acolyte will return, I'm gonna lose it. I need it.
It's just a little wild to me that now that I think about it, they didn't announce multiple seasons initially. Like when we got the Andor situation, we knew like there was speculation or leaks or whatever that were like, it's going to be this many seasons, and then they've cut it down to this many seasons, and they're actually deciding to go with this many seasons. But then it was announced and we knew we were getting 2 seasons. Yeah,
it was supposed to be 5 seasons, with each season covering 1 year leading up to Rogue One. Imagine we would have had our Game of Thrones for Star Wars, basically.
I think about that all the time, but like, it's okay. I think 2 seasons will be all right. But like, Imagine 5 seasons of Andor. I watched the Rick's Road speech last night, and I watched the Luthen monologue last night, and I was like, God damn it, this is some of the best shit I've ever seen in my life. Like,
so good. I need to do a rewatch on the 4K disc.
Yeah, no, but I was like, man, this is so good. Imagine if we got 5 of these. But that's okay that we're not. It's not the end of the world. But point being, I'm surprised that with how much talk Leslye has talked of this story that she intends to tell being multi-season, and she's not going to be a giant cliffhanger at the end of the episode of the last episode of the season, because that's not satisfying for her. So she's going to, wrap up some things, but also give you some threads that you can speculate on for the future. And I had assumed with that we knew we were getting multiple seasons, but then I think recently recently there was some talk of like, because of all the Renew the Acolyte stuff, I was like, wait a second, do we not know this? Do we not know when we're getting another one of these? If we're getting another one of these, which is crazy wild to me, because I feel I understand that certain predictable factions of the fandom are doing the exact thing that we would expect them to do, which, like, I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised kind of a vibe at this point. But I just feel like we should have gotten an announcement of multiple seasons at this point. I'll stop talking about this now.
Yeah, I would say like we should probably temper our expectations going into next week, because Leslye was very adamant that, you know, this season is going to have some level of catharsis, right? But there are also a lot of threads that she has set up that could be continued to be pulled and explored in future seasons, because she did originally pitch it as like, hey, this could be a multi-season show. So I think if Star Wars is willing to continue with it and explore even more of the story leading up to the Phantom Menace, I think it has something incredible on its hand. I mean, it does have, it's an incredible show already, but like it has the potential to be this staple of Star Wars television that could properly inform the prequels and add new context and interpretation to them that we didn't have before. And I think that's a wonderful thing when Star Wars can reiterate upon what's come before. I mean, that's what makes it so special, is it's like this tapestry that we can just keep adding to. And I think the show is doing it in a really like fascinating and compelling way, because we're having conversations about choice and destiny and institutions, right? Like that's so refreshing to talk about Star Wars in this way, because I think you and I had been missing that conversation. We've been getting it in the High Republic for sure, in this being a High Republic TV show, but I want to keep on this train despite the tragedy of this episode. I don't want to get off the ride.
Right.
You know?
Definitely. I think I was
heartbreak feels good in a place like this. You know what I mean?
Heartbreak feels good in a place like this. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head with that and completely original quote. I just think it surprises me knowing that this is ultimately a multi-season story that she's hoping to tell, that they wouldn't commit to that vision off the bat. I understand TV works a little differently than movies, but I don't know. I would
renew the Acolyte is what we're saying.
I would hate for a story or a series to be left unfinished in that sort of way. I also don't want to wait 10 years to get the finale that everybody was hoping for and wanted, or whatever, the Clone Wars, however long that took.
No, I get that. I get that. And I'm in complete agreement. So hopefully we find out more very soon. Everybody listening to this episode should be using the hashtag renew the Acolyte. Like, let's be loud.
Tell your local Congress people renew the
next week. You know, let's keep this story going. But we've talked a lot about like the larger implications and scope of this episode. Let's dive into it a little bit more and kind of talk through, you know, from start to finish here. But I want to talk a little bit about the fact that, you know, why the Jedi are on Brendok in the first place, which we learn a lot about right in the beginning of this episode when the Jedi are literally touching grass.
Good for them.
Which is hilarious because I think of John Jackson Miller talking and describing The Living Force, his book. Yeah. And he says, yeah, Qui-Gon goes to the council and says, you guys aren't in the galaxy anymore. Go touch some grass. And I thought that was a nice little beautiful connection. Yeah. To them touching grass here.
When it doesn't really intentionally rhyme, but you know, and then it does. Okay. So we've been on Brendok for about 2 months, almost 2 months. And 100 years ago, we learned that the planet Brendok was lifeless because of a hyperspace disaster. That puts us at around, 219. I did some math. Maybe it's wrong, but like 219 BBY for the hyperspace disaster, which is interesting. But also,
we can't just gloss over hyperspace disaster, Sarah. That's the hyperspace disaster.
I know, but incredible. I'm about to say the hyperspace disaster. I was like pointing at my TV, but also, is a hyperspace disaster like killing an entire planet like that? Lifelessness? Wait, you know what? we did, by we, I mean a meteor did hit the Earth and kill all the dinosaurs. So yes, but I also feel like specifically with the High Republic though, there's also this thing that is literally making planets lifeless, which is the blight. So to me, it'd be more interesting if this was a blighted world that's now back up and running again. But hey, that's a headcanon.
Right.
That's a Sarah canon.
I will say this was a great call out though for readers to be like, I know about the great hyperspace disaster. I read The Light of the Jedi.
Right. But also like this show was made like 2 years ago or at least a year ago in terms of like when they were filming, when they were putting it all together. And was the blight around for the authors over a year ago? I don't know. I like the idea of it being a blighted world that now has come back to fruitfulness. Let me have my fun. But also pointing at the screen, I love the High Republic. It was fun. It was nice.
I mean, it does mean Brundock is in the Hetzal system with Hetzal. So the moons of, what is it, Fruity and Tooty or whatever the heck it's called, are not far away. Yeah. Maybe those are the moons that we see in the sky that they do the ceremony with. That's the Fruity and Tooty moon. I think that's called Fruity and Tooty moon. Am I just making that up, or they actually call it the Fruity and Tooty moon?
I do not remember.
I'm pretty positive.
It's rooted and fruited.
Okay, rooted and fruited.
Moon.
I just made Rudy and Tooty, Fruity and Tooty. I'm losing the plot here, but it's in the Hetzal system. Confirmation, great hyperspace disaster, point at screen. I know him.
Okay, I was right. Wow, I really pulled that at the depths of my memory. The rooted moon and the fruited moon.
Okay, great. So if you're going to go with your headcanon that this is actually the blight, my headcanon is that the little things in the sky, the little moons, are the fruited and the rooted moons, and it's all connected.
I low-key kind of love that, actually.
But point being, why are the Jedi on Brundock? Because, the lifelessness before, and now it's full of life. And so what happened? We get confirmation that they're here because they're trying to find a vergence, which Soul describes as the concentration of force energy centered around a location. It can create life. It's a power that should be studied, protected. Nothing could be more important to the Jedi. This is a noble mission.
I just want to go back to the rooted and the fruited moon for 1 second. They appear orange and green in the sky, but
maybe, speaking of unreliable narrators, maybe the cameraman was blind or colorblind.
Colorblindness and the filters of other planets maybe make those red and blue. Anyway, continue.
Rashomon, he remembered the color of the moon, the fruited moon, incorrectly. It was actually green. He thought it was blue. Anyways,
right.
It is the fruited and the rooted. Okay, anyways. We're talking a little bit about vergences here, which is interesting because only other time we've really heard that is in The Phantom Menace when Qui-Gon goes to the council and says he's encountered a vergence in the Force. And it's this boy. He's got the highest midichlorian count ever seen in a life form. He might have been conceived by the midichlorians, and it's all linked to the prophecy of the Chosen One.
Do you think they have like a midichlorian count ranking chart that's like number 1 on the chart? May and Osha and Asaya with 1 billion bajillion midichlorians, and then and then they keep that in the archives, and then they test Anakin and they're like, oh, he's got 1,000,000,001.
It's the Chosen One ranking of the week, and like everybody, it's like when you're trying to figure out if you got cast in the high school play, and you're like running to the board on Monday, and you're like, did I get in?
Wow,
but it's like all the Jedi
traumatic memory for me.
They're going to the Kyber Arch and they're like, who's the chosen one this week?
Right. Or like my sophomore chemistry teacher who would write down the grades of every student on the test, ranked from the highest grade. And it would say what the highest grade was, like 100 or 104, because he always did extra credit points, to the lowest grade. But he wouldn't put it with your names. He would put it with your ID number. So you always knew where you stood in the honors chemistry class. It was kind of mean, actually. Like, here's the stupidest kid in this class. Here's the overachievers getting 104 again.
Yeah, like who had the, I mean, I would say like, did Yoda have the highest midichlorian count before Anakin? I think it was Yoda because they're like even higher than Master Yoda. Or was it just like some guy named Jeff? And Jeff's like, who's this kid from Tatooine that just usurped me as first place midichlorian count? Like that's
And then
rude.
they have to take away his certificate of like highest midichlorian count.
Right. Really embarrassing for Jeff. Jeff the Jedi.
Super embarrassing for Jeff Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
It's a bad look, Jeff. I'm just saying.
Right.
But Leslye was talking a little bit in some of the interviews, in the interview with Nerdist, actually, about how this idea of the Virgins is kind of interesting because it gives some idea as to why the witches settled here, right? You know, not only give them protection and shelter, but maybe gave them more and more power and control over their abilities. And this Virgins just became a thing that pulled a lot of characters into the picture, and the Jedi ended up here as well. And she did make the distinction too that the girls are not a Virgins. The Virgins is on Brendok, right? So it was important to make this distinction between a natural Virgins as opposed to one within a human being. So like Anakin is a Virgins. He is the Virgins is the person, whereas like this is the Virgins, the place, creating life and giving the capability to create life in this way, which I thought was kind of interesting. But, you know, like my curiosity is kind of why are the Jedi looking for Virginses, right? Like when did they start looking for Virginses? Why is this such a noble mission to them? Why is nothing more important to the Jedi than this? According to Soul, like what is it about? Do they want to find the life to control what can be created from the Virgins? Is that why they want to, you know, does it fit back to that gatekeeper mindset of like the Jedi don't want to not know about a potential Virgin somewhere and then lead to dark powers rising? Because they're clearly trying to find the chosen one too in the prequel era, and they find it with Anakin, who is a Virgins. Just kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think the idea of the Jedi looking for Virginses is compelling because it's like, to what end? But we have these 3 adults and this 1 young person on this mission. And for whatever reason, we've been here for almost 2 months and Torben doesn't know why this is an important mission or why they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And why are we leaving Torben in the dark about this? So this is a noble mission. Virginses in the Force are really important, creating life, etc., centered around a location. Why wouldn't we let Torben in on that knowledge of what they're doing here? If we're going to bring him, and if he's 25% of this mission, why would you leave him out of that important piece of knowledge? Why would you give a young person a task and not tell them what the end game is?
Mm-hmm.
Really, because it's the, why do I need to do the calculus homework if I'm never going to use calculus in real life?
It's a great example.
That's what is happening to him right now. He's like, why am I picking flowers? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, and the group doesn't seem very talkative at the beginning of this episode, right? They seem tired.
Yeah.
They seem like, why are we still doing this? You know, Torben's like picking the flowers, putting them in the little thing. Kelnaka's walking around with the little metal detector, trying to find
the metal detector.
Hey,
so
where's
funny.
the Virgins? I think that's so silly, by the way. He's just like walking around. I found a necklace. But Indara says that
the
she
Cave's
does
Wrath
not.
device. Here it is. Sorry.
Indara says, I do not tell him answers to ease his mind. I teach him to seek the answers for himself. And to me, that feels very tough coach coded. It's like, I'm tough on him because I know it'll make him better.
But it's not like Abby Lee Millering him.
I don't understand that reference.
Dance Moms, the lady from Dance Moms,
okay.
she's like,
got it.
You're trash. You're on the bottom of the pyramid. You're dancing terribly. And then like the kid is crying.
Got it. I mean, Torben does
like,
cry in this episode because he wants to go home, which is, he's just like me for real. I don't want to be anywhere else. I just want to go home.
You're home now.
Can I go home, please? I am home. I'm happy. I'm happy here. I'm home.
Good. Oh, I just like, Indara is like somewhere in the middle of like compassion, but she's not being cruel to him at the same time.
Right. Yeah. And I think this episode also painted Indara probably to be the most logical of the group in a way. Although I think she does sort of succumb to the lie at the end of it all.
Oh yeah,
we'll talk about that towards the end of this episode. But I think she's probably the most level-headed one, although to the degree of maybe being too secretive about their purpose being there, right? Like Sol is the one to give Torben the answer. Like, why was Indara withholding that information? She clearly disagrees with Sol even telling him that, right? Because now Sol making the choice to tell Torben leads Torben to go, oh, the girls are the key to all of this. Let me go get them. And that cascades, right? So Sol's choice to reveal that kind of domino effects.
But it's because Torben wasn't given the knowledge up front to have an understanding of the purpose. Like he makes that choice because he doesn't get it. He doesn't, because even Sol says it's a concentration of force energy centered around a location. So he's kind of establishing that it's a location, but why weren't we given the briefing on the way here? Why didn't the council give, these are the questions I'm asking, which make me feel like, why are we failing children by withholding knowledge from them this entire time? Yes, we want to preserve their innocence or whatever. Yes, we want to take care of them. But why are all the children in this show, all the young people in this show, why is the truth being held from them? Because that's conscious. That's a conscious choice not to tell Torben why they've left Coruscant. And that's low-key kind of bothering me, but also big high-key, just becoming really clear as a theme for this. Because May and Osha, from the Coven, they are kept from the outside world. They are kept from other children. They are isolated. But from the Jedi, Osha is lied to about what happened on Brendok. They also both, I would assume both, don't know what it means to go through the process of ascension and how they will lead the order. May says that she doesn't know how she'll do that. And then she misquotes her mom, which raises the red flags from the Jedi. Uh-oh. But also, Jackie doesn't know Sol's past with Osha. Jackie doesn't know the truth about Brendok either, because Sol is withholding the truth from everybody, including the council. He is allowed to go on as if nothing happened in the way that it actually did, and continue to make mistakes. Why are our children being failed, our young people being failed in this show? All of them.
I think this is a great time to talk about Torben and connecting to his tragic end, where he takes his own life. I walked away from this episode feeling not only were Osha and May victims, but to your point about generations and the young kids growing up in this institution, I think Torben is also a huge victim. Yes, Torben made a very rash decision and got on his speeder bike and went off. But again, it connects back to not knowing why they're there, not getting help for his anxieties to want to go home. He's impatient. He is disturbed. Or at least Sol thinks he's disturbed, but Indara says, don't confuse what Torben thinks with how you feel.
Right.
And then Torben gets to the compound, and rather than Sol saying we should go back, Sol says we need to get the twins. Indara asks Sol to get Torben and bring him back. He does not do that. He sees Torben's desire to go home and says, I can use that for my own gain by getting the twins.
Right.
So I'm going to continue with this now, rather than turn back like I'm supposed to. And again, that's another choice that Sol makes, to leverage Torben in this moment to say, we're going to climb this wall. We're going to go inside this fortress. And everything goes wrong because of that choice also. Torben's a tragic figure, I think. I think he is somebody, again, that was just kept out of the dark. He ultimately is the only one that owns up to the mistake, right? He tells May, we thought we were doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Indara doesn't own up to that. We don't know what Kelnaka owned up to, although I feel like Kelnaka's part in all this is also a bit fuzzy and not really his choice either in some ways.
Kelnaka literally became a zombie for a hot minute there.
Yeah. big mom I threw up energy when he's just like standing shadowed in the distance. When you show up to your mom's room at 3 a.m. in the morning, you're like, oh, I threw up. But yeah, like, did you walk away from this with? And I think the scene with Torben and Anisea is like pretty gut wrenching in a way. You know, like we finally see inside his mind like why he became possessed, and the conversation that Anisea has with him.
Right.
What do you like make of Torben kind of putting it all together, and like how do you feel about him at this moment?
Torben was kept in the dark. Torben wants to go home. Torben, Anisea can see that and says, you want to go home? I want you to go home too. Let's help each other. Just a tiny bit. And that's all that is, really. It's not as sinister. The black eyes are not as sinister as they seem in that moment. They're really just, hey, let's get out of here vibes.
Yeah, I agree. I think this changed my perception of that moment to say, oh, like, I mean, he is scared in that moment. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
Is he crying because he's scared of her, or is he crying because he wants so badly to go home that he'll do whatever is necessary? And I think it's a mix of the both, mix of both of those things. But her putting on that act with him is like a surefire way to get them out of there. Hopefully, like if I scare the lights out of these people, they'll go home, they'll leave. So let me use Torben, right? And she asks him to ask her, right? Like she doesn't do it until he kind of quote unquote gives her permission, right? He asks the question, then she does it, and she says, "Kneel." I will be honest, I would have folded. I would have completely folded. I would have kneeled. I would have bowed. You are a strong and good Jedi, but you have natural desires you suppress. Your master denies you. I would always let you have what you need. Why not ask me? I would have folded. I would have folded. Seduction to the dark side?
Tucks hair behind ear. Sure.
What a performance, though, by the way, by Jodie. Like, pretty good.
Yeah. She's great. She's great in this role. I really, really love her in this role.
I want to go back to, I guess, before they get to the compound, sort of the impetus of Torben making this decision, which is the M count. They get the results of the M count, tying it back together with the virgins, right? The midichlorians, they're extremely high, but the symbiotes are exactly the same, but identical twins typically would have different symbionts. So this kind of brings up the idea that, oh God, this is possibly one consciousness split into two bodies. And immediately comes to mind, the power of one, the power of two, the power of many. Only aversions could create that type of power, according to Soul here, right? You and I had speculated in episode 3, like how were the twins actually created? We had thought like maybe they consulted like a Sith or like a dark side user, right? Like they wanted a way to continue their legacy. And so that ended up being two twins that they conceived. And that makes sense, but maybe there were more nefarious motivations by the Sith to give this knowledge. Now, I think, based on what Leslye is saying, Leslye is kind of describing the twins as guinea pigs. They're patient zero for this power, and it didn't work perfectly. The girls are never going to be as powerful as Anakin, she says. Their full potential has not yet been explored because they've been separated too long, right? Anakin is one person. He has the power of one. He is the chosen one. This is the power of two, kind of speaking to that idea of the dyad, but it's one split into two. It's a fractured power. It's not Anakin's power. Anakin is, again, one being. He is a vergence.
Right.
The twins were created by a physical location of a vergence. And it's interesting because in this Nerdist article, Leslye says, if the girls are a test run, being able to improve on what that power is and being able to perfect it, that would be something, if I were a Sith, I would be interested in.
Right.
What do you think of this idea of the twins being patient zero?
Yeah.
And the Sith, somewhere in the galaxy they exist. They want immortality. They want the power to create life. Plagueis, this is the thing he is after. We don't know if he's around yet, right? And they're kind of, for lack of a better word, a failed experiment that then the Sith try to recreate and perfect through the creation of a dyad, perhaps. That's the perfection.
Kind of fucked. Brad's like looking at me. You have more to say? No, kind of fucked. I feel like there's of course, oh, gosh, it's in episode 6. Do I have these notes? Let's find out. There's a moment when we're talking about agency. That's your strength in the Force, Osha. Someone ought to teach you that. As in, like, it's not Soul's strength in the Force. It's your strength in the Force. And the fact that you don't realize that it's your strength in the Force, you've been done a disservice to, because you're actually really important and powerful. Kind of a vibe that's like given there. And like I go back and forth on like the manipulation or not manipulation of Osha. And frankly, for the ship, I don't care to I don't know, that sounded really problematic, but like it's fiction. I don't give a shit. But like there's a certain of course Chimere is interested in these twins and their story and what's happened to them because he recognizes the power that they have. And he wants them to actualize that power because it helps him as well.
Yeah. And the thing about it all too is like their power hasn't been fully explored because they've been separated.
Right.
What would happen if they were together? What would happen if they grew up and could be that powerful dyad?
Is there an avenue for you where Osha and May end up on the same side?
I think it's entirely plausible. It could happen. Like, I think it'd be interesting to explore what would happen if these two were on the same side and could be a force to reckon with, you know? So somewhere in the galaxy, the Sith are seeing that this power is happening. Leslye was describing it as like the Manhattan Project. Like the twins aren't the Manhattan Project. The twins are the early lectures and the theories that led up to the Manhattan Project. And then the Manhattan Project would be like Plagueis trying to create a dyad or, you know, create life, attain that power. And I find that analogy really interesting. And it just kind of speaks to like the larger scope of how the Sith fit into the story. I know Leslye had said that, you know, next week there will be some small things that might answer the question of, is Chimere a Sith? Not explicitly, we won't hear it from his mouth, but some things that will give light to that. And also how she, you know, if she gets more time to tell the story, she would eventually like to see how it plays out from Acolyte to Plagueis. And she thinks it'd be complicated and messy. And I think the twins are the key to all of this, right? Like, I think that's why we're watching the story unfold. It's about this power, this imperfect power that hasn't been fully tapped into quite yet. Will it get tapped into, and how does it lead to the rise of the Sith?
Right.
With these two twins, they're kind of the catalyst for it all, which I find fascinating. Let's talk about the confrontation between Coral, Anastasia, Torben, Soul. We know the Jedi did something bad. We kind of all felt that like Soul was going to have some sort of betrayal. Like we were going to view him differently coming out of this week, and we certainly do, right? Like we've talked about this so much throughout, but this moment where they're talking and he asks, how were the twins created? And, you know, we're here with noble intentions, even though we sliced into your mainframe and we climbed the walls to get in here.
Right.
And Anastasia gives that clapback of those noble intentions will destroy every Jedi in the galaxy. And then we have the moment where May comes out. She started the fire. You know, we clearly see from her perspective here that she burned the book, but didn't mean to start the electrical fire. She's kind of scared as soon as it happens, right? And you can sense that regret on her face. What did you make of the moment that she comes out? Coral starts to go into a fighting stance and Anastasia intervenes.
This moment is when I was probably most devastated and was really upset because it obviously, as we see, all happens within just a single moment. All these choices are being made with just a single moment. Soul mistakes May for Osha. It's not the first time this has happened.
Yep.
Again, Soul is a very emotional person. He's kind of letting his desire for Osha as his Padawan obscure the truth of the moment. Anastasia turns into the black force cloud, dark magic, whatever you want to call it. And Coral and Torben stand off in that moment. And like, that's it. This was devastating. This was really devastating, especially after Soul makes the choice out of fear. Although I just genuinely feel like Anastasia was just moving across the courtyard or whatever, just taking May out of that situation. Right? Like, do you have a different opinion on what was happening there?
Leslye gave some insight into this, and I'm curious as to your thoughts.
For on her insight or just what was happening there? Because that's what I thought was just happening there.
What she believes, yeah. So Leslye had said the why about the dematerializing is the first thing that Jodie and I talked about in seeding the character. What she is doing is what Jackie says in episode 4, that it's an honor to see anyone transform into the Force. I believe that Anastasia is transforming herself in May into the Force in a way that doesn't kill them.
Yeah.
So like, whether that's taking them somewhere else. I mean, we see Coral do it, and nobody.
She's totally alive. She's literally totally alive.
She's alive somewhere, you know.
Totally alive.
Yeah, but I perceive that kind of what Leslie's saying is like, I think they were going to transform into the Force and go somewhere else, and dematerialize and then materialize in another location.
Right. In order to save them and to keep them safe. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But Soul thinking that's Osha is like, oh God, what is she doing to Osha? Osha
right,
is
and
mine.
Then it becomes very threatening.
That possessiveness. I'm gonna make a choice here.
Yeah.
And stop.
Wrong choice to make.
Yeah. Horrible choice.
Bad choice. And yeah, this was really interesting because then of course Mother Anastasia is like, I was gonna let her go. She chose you. And Soul's like, oh shit. In his mind. I can hear the slow motion italicized, oh shit,
Yeah. That, and when he sees the marking on May's head and is like, oh God, ×2.
Right.
This isn't even Osha.
Right. It's really interesting as well because after that moment, you see Coral and Soul fight a little bit. And Soul's defending. And then Coral does the same thing that May is doing in the very beginning of the series, which is fight me out of grief and pain and anger. She has principles. She has morals. She won't go after, relentlessly. But they are the same in that way, in that they need their anger and their grief and their pain to be tangible through a battle, and need to win. And I thought that was really interesting. Also, that gives me like the Mother Coral is still around kind of a vibe. Like,
oh, she definitely is. Oh my gosh. I do want to say shout out to Jodie Turner-Smith, R.I.P. first off, to Mother Anastasia, but also Mother, like right before this, she's like talking to her coven, and the coven's like, you're our leader, like you're not just a mother, and she's like, but now I choose Mother, and I was like, yeah, slay queen.
That was great. Smooch her right on the mouth for that one. So good. Loved that.
And I think like, and just until the end, like again, like she did choose Mother, and she did not want this to resort to violence, and again, it's that assumption of Soul sees dark magic happening and he assumes violence, but really we know from everything that she has said behind closed doors that the Jedi don't see is like no violence.
That's not their thing.
We're not having it, right? And it's just like Star Wars. If people like talked to each other, if people just talked,
we could solve so many problems in fiction and in real life if people talk to each other.
Yeah. 100%.
Not all the problems, but a certain number of them, certainly.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a good time to bring up Torben going to the lightsaber school of twirly, twirly, swingy, swingy.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about Torben in these couple of scenes here, but the way that he is moving his lightsaber makes my brain go brrr. I love it. I love Torben. Little king. I know you made some mistakes, Torben, but like who amongst us haven't? I loved him like twirling and fighting off the arrows. That was so cool. Like the choreography for the rest of this episode is just insane. It's through the roof, really good. Did you like Torben swingy, swingy, twirly, twirly, spinny, spinny?
Spinny, spinny, twirly, twirly, swingy, swingy. Yes. Also, zombie strong Wookiee Kalnaka fighting.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, that was fun.
You got your Kalnaka content. How did you feel? Like he wasn't just a dead Wookiee.
I hated it.
Okay, like aside from the fact that he was possessed, what did you think of him being like strong and stiff arming and
cool?
Getting pushed,
it was cool.
Pushing people against walls.
It was
pushing people. you know, who wouldn't want to be strong armed by a Wookiee? You know what I mean?
Just don't edit a single bit of that. Just let this play out. I just did think the choreography was pretty good and enjoyable. And I did watch that scene last night. I was like to my friend who's not a Star Wars person, I was like, zombie Wookiee, let's go. He's big and strong and scary.
He's got great thighs and big arms, and I love him.
If we're talking about Wookiee thighs, Kersantin. Indara does kill all the witches through the Force at the end of this to get Kalnaka unpossessed, which made me sad because, again, we learned that through an interview, and I just thought they were maybe knocked out, and then maybe the witches could continue on, and then maybe Osha is going back and forth, because a question that I had, right, with the Bunta poison in episode whatever, 2, it doesn't stay good distilled for a long while, so it must have had to have been made close by. But the question is, does the Bunta stay fresh like when you pick it, between when you pick it and when you distill it? Does that also have to be soon? Because I was like, ooh, is May going back and forth to Brendock? Why would she go back and forth to Brendock? Oh, because the witches are still there. Or Coral's still there.
Got it.
This is just
I mean, I think Coral's definitely out there somewhere. I did find it interesting that she all but confirmed that the witches are dead here. But that was the way I interpreted it, because I felt like she didn't intentionally do it. But I think it was like an act of desperation of like, I need to do something to save Kalnaka here. And like, I need to sever this connection. And Leslye kind of said like, she does that and she deals with the power she does not understand. Right.
Right.
And so the witches have this power, but the Jedi are unfamiliar with their abilities. And so her severing that connection like unintentionally kills all of them in a way. Right. She said there is some like room for interpretation if you wanted to maybe think that they didn't die, but they still died in the fire afterwards. But she's like, they're dead regardless. Right. But just another moment here of not only like Soul making choices and Torben making choices, but Indara making her kind of first consequential choice here of she takes some lives in the process and she makes a mistake, and like exploring her part in this as well, I think is interesting, especially going back to like the first episode when we hear May tell her, she says, the Jedi doesn't attack the unarmed, and May's like, yes, you do. Right. So now that gives more credence to that conversation of like, oh yeah, Indara definitely attacked the unarmed, whether she meant to or not. She did. It happened.
I'm going to ponder on that one, but I want to jump to something that I tweeted that I clocked, but I don't think other people clocked. Speculation, but also I think canon, Daniel Jose Older Gavel, which is Indara totally does not call the council and be like, hey, we got these 2 twins on Brendock. They're kids in this Force cult. Can we bring them in as Jedi if they want to? Oh, and then she goes, the council said no. There's no way that she called them. Thank you. That's what I need to say. So actually, I have a little bit more to say because she says, Torben, you should go run this sample. You should run the blood sample. And then she goes, Sol, you should go back to the campsite and I'll just like come out there when we have something to tell you. I'm going to call the council. We'll figure it out. And then she kind of like looks around and waits for them to leave. And then that cuts. And then the next scene's like, oh, and they said no. And I just don't think there's any way because, again, May as a twin is not on Osha's profile within her records within the Jedi Temple. Also, Indara's so set on not taking them. She's so set on let's leave them be. We don't have the full picture here. This is not our business. Let's leave them be. And saying no just confirms her point of view. If she asks the council and they maybe say yes, then she's been made a fool. You know, or she's been wrong. And she doesn't want to give in to Soul's very kind of emotional point of view. And so I think that was her first lie. Her first kind of lie. And then at the end when she goes, oh, we will tell the council the truth that May set the fire and everybody died. And then like, that's the lie too. And she does these things to protect the people around her, but it's to her, it's to the benefit of, you know, Osha to lie to the council. But that in itself will come to bite them all the Jedi and everybody in the ass, because instead of letting her work through the truth and what actually happened, her entire sense of self has been built on a lie. Anyway, that's it. I will stop yapping now.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Like the sense of self being built on a lie, and by the fact that she truly had no agency in all of this, right? And the moment too, like Soul again chooses Osha. That scene where he's holding the bridges is so distressing, right? Like it's just so. I watched it again today, and I felt terrible watching it. And we had theorized about that too a couple weeks ago, where we were saying like, could he have saved them both, and he deliberately only chose one? Because, you know, we see him force levitate her in the cliff on an episode 1, and it ended up happening exactly that way, right? And so to tell a version of the truth of not only, you know, sure, May started a fire, but like he's villainizing her in that process, especially when Osha's last moments with May on that bridge are like, hey, Mama's dead. Not the Jedi killed Mama. Mama's dead. And then Osha just being like, what have you done? And her living with that idea pretty much the rest of her life, until she ideally, I guess, learns the truth probably in episode 8 and the consequences of that.
I think that the Jedi would have been totally fine if they never had actually told Osha the truth. They'd be like, if Osha lives her whole life without the truth, then that'd be okay with us.
Yeah, and it'd be okay with them, which I think is the wrong thing to do, right? Because there's like the difference between like a white lie and like a capital L lie, right? Like withholding such a critical piece of somebody's past, especially knowing she is grieving, like the Jedi knowing also that she is too old to start training. They withhold the truth from her because they know that it would kind of form that attachment, that fear, anger, suffering that leads to the dark side. Like the Jedi withheld the truth to protect themselves, not to protect Osha. They didn't care about how Osha felt. They were just like, we can't have the potential of this child turning to the dark side. And the irony of it all is she's probably going to anyways.
Right.
Because they withheld that truth, right?
Exactly.
And Soul wants to face the council, and Indara says, why would you do that to her? After everything this little girl has lost tonight, you would take her away her dream as well. Before you throw yourself at the mercy of the council, ask yourself why you made this choice.
We got to kill the dream.
There's that word choice.
We got to kill the dream.
So yeah, the acolyte kills the dream. There you go. Right. So this truth, Osha learning this truth, is killing the dream. It's exactly what Kymir wants. He wants that dream dead. He wants that dream of the institution you thought was being nice to you was actually not nice. This promise that Soul made to you was not actually a promise whatsoever. It was never going to happen.
Yeah.
But I can show you, as somebody who is your equal, I can show you, again, to your point, that door, open it. Let's explore that together as equals. And I think it's a very dangerous territory that we're in because of what the Jedi did. And we're going to see the consequences of that next episode.
Totally.
But I think the exclamation point at the end of this is Osha saying what happened. Soul looking to Indara, her nodding. And then Soul saying May started a fire. And then the end, right? Like there's nothing else after that. I think that was a brilliant way to end the episode. It was just like, yeah, this was all predicated on a lie. Like, yeah, May did start a fire, but like you're missing a lot of context there, Soul. You're missing a lot of the gaps. We know the gaps now, but like, oof.
Should we kind of bring this episode to a close with some maybe odds and ends? Because I have one kind of very silly one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Kel Naka, Kill Naka, Indara. What are we doing, girl?
You mentioned this on episode 3, Kel Naka.
With Kel Naka, but now we have Kill Naka.
And she says Kill Naka?
Yeah, Kill Naka.
Oh.
It's like an IA, or like IE, Kill Naka. Emphasis on the first syllable. What are we doing? It's fine. Live your life. But LOL.
Make up your mind, Indara.
Anyway, that's my only odds and ends.
I have 2 here.
Okay.
One of which, actually 3. One of them which connects to Kel Naka, but somebody on Twitter brought up the idea of Mad Claw, which I think is a Legends concept, but it was apparently a term used by Wookiees to mark dishonored members of the Wookiee community. And so any Wookiee who lashed out against another Wookiee with their claws was deemed to be a Mad Claw. The title was a grave dishonor since the Wookiees viewed the use of claws for anything other than tools as feral, and Mad Claws were usually sent into exile. This is from the Mad Claw page on Wikipedia. And I thought that was kind of interesting because maybe that gives some meaning to why Kel Naka is like on Kofar.
Or in the forest on Kofar specifically.
Yeah, because he felt that as a Wookiee, he used his claws in a feral, aggressive manner and therefore sent himself into exile out of embarrassment or out of shame. So I thought that was kind of interesting. There was a question to Leslye about the Knights of Ren being potentially connected to Chimere. And her quote said, "It's a really good theory. What an interesting theory. What an amazing, wow. Wow. Wow." 3 wows.
I would have loved to hear the audio. Is that on audio or is that just the video, like a written article?
It's just a written article. I'm probably giving some own pronunciation to that.
No, but I would love
for the meme,
because I think that would clarify how people are interpreting that. If we actually could hear that, because some people are like, "Oh, he's Ren. He's the original Knight of Ren," and other people are like, "Wow, she's just thinking about that because that's really interesting and she's very knowledgeable about Star Wars. That's a really interesting kind of way to present things, and not necessarily like, oh wow, you figured it out kind of a vibe."
Yeah, look at me putting some spin on how she is saying that, and I have no clue how she is. But like, I think
we have no clue how she is. So
yeah,
everybody's putting spin on it.
Yeah, I think it's connected to the Knights of Ren because I think that would be kind of interesting. But our last odds and ends here is on StarWars.com. Vernestra had her High Senate robes revealed, which might give us an indication of what's going to happen on the finale. But costume designer Jennifer Bryan had said, quote, "She has a lot to carry. She knows things. She knows that there's a lot of," the word I would use is a lot of duplicity, and what the Jedi did in the name of protecting the Force. She's basically trying to manage and do damage control with the Senate. So her outfit looks like very heavily inspired by Mom Mothma. I'm excited to see, like, is she going to attend some sort of audit meeting next week where she, the senator, was it Rayburn or something?
Rayancourt.
I was so off. What does she know about the events on Kofar, and what is she going to actually speak to for this audit meeting into the Senate?
I think that Soul is so cooked. Like, I think it's over for him.
Yeah, does she blame it all on Soul? I don't know.
Because okay, let me pull up my other notes. Okay. Episode 1. Also, the line "Fire is a power. It's a power we must respect."
Oh, when the little girl sees fire. Yeah.
That's something Soul says with the little code. Anyway, that popped up to me. Soul and Vernestra agree that the conversation about a former Jedi killing one of their own could be used against them. Based on that, we know that she's going to go to the Senate or is meeting with the Senate in some way because of these robes. Could this be a foreshadowing of an example of Soul? They have to find somebody to blame, and they can blame Jedi, which is what Mog says, oh, you know, maybe there's only one person, it could be Sol. And she goes, that's a really bold accusation. Because maybe blaming a Jedi and that being an easy answer is easier overall than blaming an unknown dark side figure, not only for the Senate, who is probably seeking an answer from the Jedi, but also maybe killing the reputation of the Jedi institution in this way and dealing with it in this way is easier to save face than saying there's something we don't understand out there.
100%, because what we don't understand, then it becomes, well, what are you guys doing? How would you not know this is happening? I hadn't even thought about it that way, but you're so right. Blaming one of their own is an easier route out, because it's like, hey, we're taking responsibility for a rogue person here. We're sorry. We got it under control.
This was tragic. This was awful, but this was a single rogue actor who has come back to us, or maybe is on the run, and it is our sole mission to punish him. And that is problem solved, but closed. Like I do see that as a potential genuine end to his story in this season.
But I don't think Sol would agree with doing that, which means
he doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to, because I think he's a goner.
No. I don't think he's a goner. I think that
is he not going to plead his case if that happens? Would he not say, there is a dark side person? We know there's a Sith. He's admitted to being a Sith to me.
I don't think he gets the opportunity to. Either they put him in jail, don't give him a voice, or because who's going to listen to him if he's a Jedi killer? Who's going to actually listen to him? Osha's not going to vouch for him anymore. Jeki's dead. Yord is dead. Who will vouch for him anymore? May probably won't vouch for him, because even if she knows the truth, that's very upsetting. Who will vouch for him? But also May and Sol are somewhere unknown at present. So Vernestra can go to the Senate and be like, Senate, one of our own, Master Sol, has killed Jedi, gone rogue, and he's kidnapped a young girl. Right? Like, he's kidnapped this person. We are making it our mission to find him and bring him in. Whatever. Or maybe May gets that message to the High Council or whatever and says that Sol has lied to me this whole time about what happened on Brendok. You should maybe know. That's another way to scapegoat him. And then she's then becomes a party to bringing him in.
I think there's a lot of possibilities. I'm really leaning in the camp of he is a goner, because I think that's sort of just the easiest way out, in the sense of, like, Vernestra blames it on him. He dies. He can't even plead his case. And she's thinking, oh, I mean, I know Vernestra knows that there is something tipping the scales. Leslye even says that Vernestra is kind of like Anastasia, in the sense that they both have this very intense sense of foresight, and that Vernestra thinking that there's something to tip the scales is an understanding that there is this destiny that she has, and that there's going to be this fulfillment of destiny that's coming. And so even if Vernestra blames it on Sol, I don't think that necessarily is the end of Vernestra's line of questioning and her need to uncover more of this picture. I think she'll continue to do that into season 2, if there's a season 2. But, like, I think that she, like you said, she's going to blame it on Sol, and then she's going to spend more time investigating what's going on, so that when she does bring forth there is something else going on, she has more evidence. But does she find out enough ever if the Jedi don't think the Sith are around anymore? Like, this is like, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen next week. I don't like the fact that we're getting high Senate robes for Vernestra. That feels weird to me. Oh, what is she going to tell? What lie is she going to tell? We've already lost Sol as the father figure in the act of betrayal. Are we gonna have an act of betrayal by Vernestra? Our beloved Vernestra Rowe.
Right. Well,
and that whip-shaped scar on Chimere's back. What has she got to hide?
We'll find out.
Oh gosh, I'm scared. I hope we stick the landing, but I'm so excited. But that ends it for this week's episode on episode number 7. So we'll be back next week to talk about the finale. Very, very exciting stuff. I believe the finale is titled Doom, according to one of the interviews with Manny and Amandla. So that
spooky
definitely forebodes well. But until then, if you want to hear more from us or follow what we're doing on the podcast, follow us on all of our socials and leave a review wherever you listen to the podcast, and follow us so that our finale discussion drops into your feed. And we're really excited for this season to come to a close, but also very sad. Please renew the Acolyte for season 2, Lucasfilm.
Seriously, we're suffering in limbo currently.
Yeah. Please free us of our pain.
Yes, but thanks so much to our patrons as well for your support. They are Brian, Ben, Cheryl, Clay, David, Emma, Jennifer, Katie, Knights of Ren, Krista, Leanne, Logan, Lucy, Lindsay, Matthew, Nathan, Nicole, Rob, Ruth, Santa, Sky Talkers, Tom, and Travis. So very grateful for your support. Thank you for everybody who's taken the time to join us for these conversations. We love you. We thank you. Please stay well. Hope you enjoy the finale, and we'll be back in your feeds quite soon.
Yeah. Thank you all once again. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.
Bye.